Amat merat ike tesolderat ikmerut.
Hey all, Dave here. Welcome to episode 6 in me and Rev discussing the 7 Types of Atheism from John Gray. This chapter has moved into a slightly more positive one. He's discussing kinds of atheisms that he, even if he doesn't completely agree with them, he doesn't hate them. And he discusses a couple of interesting characters. This one is atheism without progress. And it mostly discusses philosopher Santayana. I can't remember his first name now.
George.
George, thank you. And Joseph Conrad. And he talked about their lives and how he saw them living as atheists. So, good evening, Rev. How you doing, mate?
Doing good. Crack-a-lacking right along in Tennessee here.
Nice one. Did you enjoy the chapter?
Yeah, I did. It was a little different. It was there's essentially two biographies about George Santayana and Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad, novelist, famous for writing what was called the Heart of Dark in the Heart of Darkness. Yeah. But about the Congo, which I think was the inspiration for like Apocalypse Now, and a lot of other books about some of the atrocities that happened in the Belgian King Leopold Congo. And Santayana was a philosopher, very well respected, and famous for the quote, a couple quotes. He was famous for the only people that see the end of war are the dead, and those who do not remember history are forced to repeat it. I know that's one that gets attributed to a lot of different people, but it's actually George Santayana who said that. And I'm pretty sure he also said, you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave.
Well, you know, he was living in a hotel.
That's right. That's right. A nunnery, as it were. But you know, for all intents and purposes, a hotel of sorts. But yeah, and so I took the approach when I read this, and Hayes John Gray doesn't, the author of Seven Types of Atheism, doesn't necessarily tell us like why he likes these guys or why he included them. They're two very different authors that, as everybody else in this book, is linked to Bertrand Russell one way or the other. And, you know, obviously he respects their writing and he respects their academic careers, but there wasn't a lot of discussion like, you know, what about these guys? So I kind of read some Wikipedia biographical information about both guys and tried to see them as perhaps these were guys that he felt like emulated what atheism without progress is.
Yeah. I think, like you were saying before we started recording, it's the kind of chapter where you have to tease out what John Gray is the information that he's trying to give you. He's giving you a sort of biographical take on these two people, but he highlights certain issues and certain in Santayana's case, he highlights certain philosophers that he also follows, like I think it's Lucretius.
Yeah. And materialism.
Yeah. And I think that's what he's trying to point at, because Santayana also kind of comes across as an existentialist. So it tells us, you know, he doesn't believe in any kind of objective value. Values are all very subjective things. There is no end goal. There is no real good and evil at work trying to force your life certain ways. He just kind of blew with the wind.
Yeah. And not necessarily, working towards an endpoint, but also, unlike the Marquis de Sade, not seeing nature as destructive or, something to exploit.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was definitely a fan of you said Lucretius. Is that how you would?
Yeah.
Someone I'm not familiar with, and and Santayana talked about his atheism, and this is a quote that he gave while he was living in the convent. My atheism, like that of Spinoza, he is true piety to the universe and denies only God fashioned by men in their own image to be servants of their human interests.
Yeah.
So, sort of like respectful of nature, maybe like something that you would see in an indigenous sort of religion that really, isn't about gods but just nature, and
Yeah.
having respect for that, and then just not having gods involved in it that are, man-made and there to serve, like he said, the human interests.
Yeah. And he was very much into, or at least the way he was being described, he was very much into things like beauty for beauty's sake.
Yeah.
And just enjoy, I suppose he comes across as kind of a hedonist. And I think one of the other philosophers is Epicurus that gets mentioned.
Yep, Epicurus, yeah.
Yeah, who put forward a kind of hedonism which was based on simply, trying to live your life with as much pleasure, and not the sort of hedonism that you think about in modern day, where you think about just everybody going out and having orgies and
Right.
but this was a very mediated kind of going after pleasure, never too much, never too little, all based in the virtues. And he sort of embodied that, casting off all kind of religious values about what is right and wrong, and just going after that kind of hedonistic life.
Right. It with no regard to superstition or the
Yeah.
supernatural or anything like that. Yeah, because Epicurus was also like a student of Lucretius as well, right?
I thought it was the other way around.
Yeah, you could
Sorry,
be right.
I'm kind of tired, so I'm probably wrong.
Yes, no, you are right. I believe I got that mixed up. Yeah, yeah. So there's like a lineage there of Epicurus to Lucretius to
Yeah.
Santayana, and like I said, throughout this book, for somebody that's just starting to learn about these names, and you can really pick up a lot of information on how they fit together. And for someone like Dave that's read a lot more of this, it might be like good to reinforce it or whatever. But for someone like myself, it's great to kind of see how it all works together.
Yeah.
In a very, very basic and elementary way, of course.
Yeah. But he does a good job of giving you just enough facts of what you need in order to, put the pieces together without
Yeah.
leaving you feeling like you don't know anything about what he's just talked about. He's a pretty good writer in that sense.
I think so. And then, so while we're saying, okay, he, sort of has this positive view towards nature without religion, he's also not anti-religion.
Yeah.
He had a quote here that I liked. He says, why should we be angry with dreams, with myth, with allegory, with madness? We must not kill the mind as some rationalists do in trying to cure it. It is a strange sort of naturalism that singles out religion to be purged from human life. Few things are more natural for humans than religion.
Yeah, I love that quote, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's been one of my favorite quotes in the whole book so far.
Yeah, and that comes from Santayana, and I think that last bit is actually from Gray. But yeah, it's like, how do Dave and I enjoy watching horror movies or enjoy watching science fiction or things like that? I mean, the rationalist in us should squash all of that stuff, but we have a need for imagination and a need for creative thought and a need to kind of live in our heads outside of reality. And for some people, that becomes religion. And again, that happens all naturally. And the metaphor of trying to cure a person by killing what they are makes no sense.
No, it doesn't. And myths are good things. And they're constantly being formed. We see them formed all the time in atheist communities about various different things like Easter and all that.
Yeah. And we create our own narratives, and some of it is helpful, some of it isn't. But it's always pretty cringy when people, say, hey, the Bible's is a bunch of myths. And it's like, what's wrong with myths? I mean, we don't say that about the Greeks and the Romans or the Incas or the Aztecs. And, the difference is we don't believe them, or some of us don't believe that they're true, but it isn't the myth's fault. And that was, I'm sure a lot of the things, that we, hold true. Maybe progress is a myth, and human progress is the biggest myth of all. And so none of us are exempt from mythology being a part of our life.
Yeah. I mean, it helps us to communicate as well. It'd be like giving up metaphors. You wouldn't be able to actually teach particular lessons without the use of metaphors or without the use of myths.
Yeah, and also, in a time where you're trying to explain things like suffering or loss or how things came to be, myths, again, not that they are the right thing, but it's pretty natural for us to generate them. And I think in fact, I know most people have them that just aren't aware of it.
Yeah. And I think they also kind of give a good sense of the kind of people that existed around the time of those myths. Like going back to Greek times, you see certain kinds of myths.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of learn what those Greeks were like from it. But you can also kind of see that in modern day myth making. You can kind of see what kind of people the groups are just from the kind of myths that they tell each other.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at like Donald Trump, for example. People will be like, he was a great college baseball player, and then people believe it. And why is that? They want to believe it. And at some point, we have to understand that the way our brains work is we're going to be more inclined to believe myths that we want to than facts that we don't.
Oh, yeah, all the time, yeah. People will reject facts in favor of falsehoods, depending on how they've picked up the information, where they picked it up, how important that information is to their identity, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that should be a big pushback on the very tired indoctrination trope as well too. This whole like they've been indoctrinated, and it's like, no, it's just how we are. And there are people that do get indoctrinated, and there are people that do get pretty horrible situations, but indoctrination shouldn't happen in the home of every average family, because then it's meaningless.
Yeah, it would also mean that you're indoctrinating your kids into pretty much everything that you do, your hobbies, pretty much everything you do.
Right. And then it feeds into the conspiracy of schools indoctrinating us, and higher education indoctrinating us. And that's not healthy, and it's not accurate, and it's not good. And at some point, I feel like the indoctrination trope is just something. It's like get off the hook. And at some point, my parents taught me some good things. They taught me some stupid shit. It's my responsibility to abandon the stupid shit. And if I don't, then that's on me. And it's not my fault that my parents, it's not their fault that they told me that, and their responsibility. It's my responsibility to continually remove the bad beliefs and replace them with better beliefs.
Yeah.
Like I say, this sort of, drives at home that there's no cure for religion. There's no way to remove it. It's just it's a natural phenomenon.
Yeah. And it, like you mentioned in episodes previous, it is something that you would kind of expect natural selection to favor because it helps people stay alive.
Yeah.
And it could just be, a part of what it means to have cognitive capacities like ours and evolve and start wanting to learn new things. Religion seems like something that might evolve in any kind of culture that evolves in those ways.
It does. They all have religions, and I don't think if all religion was wiped out tomorrow or tonight at midnight, I promise you at 12:10 we'd have new religions.
I mean, look at Comte, who we discussed a few episodes ago. He got rid of it all, got into reason, and then decided, well, reason says I must form a religion.
Yeah.
Around reason.
Yeah, and I know that's one of those poop your pants trigger moments when you mention atheist religion in a sentence back to back. But yeah, there's been atheist religions, and they do exist.
And formed on purpose, knowing that they were atheist religions. Yeah.
Yeah. And the important thing is to separate out religion, belief, and not use a very vague and general term like religion or theism for a specific, very obviously toxic set of doctrine.
Yeah, don't say theists stand, shouting God hates fags.
Yeah,
the Westboro Baptists too.
That's right. Yeah, get the specific. That's the ones you have the beef with, because ultimately, theists are going whatever social or political movements in especially in a place like America, whatever social or political movements mean the most to me, I am going to be opposed by theists and I'm going to be supported by theists.
Yeah,
that I know. So, understanding which theists or which religions, but just general statements like religion is poison or theists want to see, it's those sorts of things are best left behind in addressing specific churches, specific people, rather than grouping everybody into it all together.
Yeah. And the other interesting thing about something like that is it goes back to something else you've said recently. A lot of atheists argue that using that sort of super broad singular definition is a nice catch-all term, and it gives, like voting power, and it gives a kind of strength. It gives a kind of power that the atheist could have in like somewhere like America. But if that was part of the purpose, you would think that they would want to be more specific, because if part of it is voting power and keeping creationism out of schools, say, keeping Republicans out of women's wombs, you would think they would want to be more specific, because they wouldn't want to alienate the theists that actually agree with them, because there's more block voting power there.
Yeah. And it's you aren't big enough to do it on your own. That's the reality. And you need you need to find your allies. You need to find the people that are, and again, it's a natural occurrence. It's some of it is you're going to find favorable, some of it you're not. But and again, people need to have the grace to find their path, answer the questions that they have in their lives at their speed and at their pace and on their timetable, not mine, or the person that's agitated or feels like they have the sense of urgency, and you have people exploring the scientific aspects in their life, and then the people exploring the religious slash philosophical, however you want to call it, those answers. Why am I here? Why do bad things happen to me? How do I handle this grief? People need to be able to do that on their own path, and not be. And there's another quote here I really liked from Santiago that kind of ties into that. Is it the love of man that prompts the hatred of religion? No, it is the insensibility to the plight of man and all that which man most deeply loves.
Yeah, that was another amazing quote. I think this chapter is the one that's really kind of captured my own outlook. And quotes like that just say how I see it, but in a way that I could never hope to.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. Like you see somebody on Twitter posts, I lost my job today. Really disappointed, really depressed. And then someone responds, I'm sorry to hear that, brother. Sending prayers your way. And there's almost always that guy that's like, well, why don't you send him $50? Prayers aren't going to do anything, you dipshit.
Yeah.
And so what motivates that guy? Is it the guy's hatred of religion? No, as like Santiana says, it's his insensibility to this guy's plight.
Yeah.
And rather than being sensitive and thoughtful, so it's really not even a hate of religion. It's perhaps or seeing people do good too. You know what I mean? Like tearing them down. If they love their church or they love their relationship with God or whatever, the need to kind of piss all over that. That's a pretty human, nature thing to do too. And certainly, theists do the same, or Christians or whatever do the same thing. It's a human thing to do. It's not a believer. Your God belief status has nothing to do with that. It's entirely a human thing, and it's not a hatred of a lack of religion or hatred of religion. It's insensitivity to people's plight. And you will see Christians that do say like, hey, we need to listen to these people and hear them out and feel their pain and ask, why do you hate the church, or why what is your story? What is your, just rather than, why did you make your hair purple? Rather than just assuming because they have their hair purple, they're throwing their lives away or whatever. And, finding out the why somebody did something and listening to them. And you do see Christians saying, hey, back off, Greg Locke, let these people say their piece and feel welcome. And you just got to be smart enough to sort of discern and sort that out. There's, are they doing it because they're insensitive, or is it because of the hatred of that person's religious beliefs? And that's really what it is, I think, mostly.
I think sometimes you could probably have a mix of both, but I do think it is mostly, like, in a lot of instances, I see it's the person being attacked. Like,
yeah.
You saying it's a human trait. Well, it's a human trait enough where there's actual cognitive biases written, named after it. And I can't remember, but I think it's the sour grapes bias, where, it causes you to think in a sort of jealous sense, based
Yeah.
on the Aesop's fable about the fox and
Right.
the sour grapes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't have those, so they must have been bad.
Yeah. And perhaps, thinking about it now, the way you put it, maybe that is part of it. They're feeling a sense of loss of their religion, and they're seeing religious people still happy. So perhaps there's a bit of sour grapes going on there in some instances.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. And again, rather than, I mean, it just seems wrong to assume that these people are delusional or stupid or insane, but find out, why do they go to church every weekend? Why do they sing hymns? And um, it's pretty sad to just assume that they're all delusional or indoctrinated or cannot think on their own. Um, but there's a lot of people working through addictions. There's a lot of people working through grief, tragedies, or maybe these are the only people that have ever given them the time of day. Why wouldn't you want that or bias towards that?
Yeah.
There's reasons, and you can usually find the answers with a more sympathetic approach rather than some sort of meme about how people are delusional or crazy, or no thanks, I'm not nuts, I don't need to go to church.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that's kind of the neat thing about Santayana is having none of it bothered him. Like, there was a quote early on where they were like, hey, this government's going to try to do communism, and he was kind of like,
Have
let
fun
them
with
have
it.
fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Go for it. Other people who tried other things and it didn't work out, they can't do any worse.
Yeah, right. So just have fun with it. And that's not to say that we shouldn't. Our lives are precious. Our lives should be enjoyable, but also we shouldn't feel that there's things that we need to be concerned about, obviously, and there's things that we need to pay attention for other people too.
Yeah.
But also, I think trying to understand people is way more important than trying to understand fallacies or definitions
Yeah.
or things of that nature. And maybe you have a lot of the same worldviews, but you just don't believe in God. That's it. Rather than being all sideways and angsty about it.
And your mention of angst there also makes me think another reason why John Gray might have included him as an example of an atheist. Of course, one of the common tropes is, you can't get a happy atheist. All atheists are miserable.
Yeah.
And he would have known, obviously, that there would be Christians and whatnot reading this book. So perhaps he's also thrown him in there as an example that kind of counterbalances that claim from the Christians.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And I think Bertrand Russell is a pretty pleasant guy altogether as well too, so not to say that they didn't have issues, but yeah, it doesn't have to be. But I also think too, the angsty thing is really more of a common era thing. Maybe some of the nihilist stuff, and I don't even think those people were necessarily. But it's just their outlook was bleak. That doesn't mean that people were. You can have a pretty bleak and dark look on things, but still be sympathetic and wanting the best for people, but just hold a very sort of and that sort of goes along with this whole myth of progress that's kind of talked about in this chapter too, where you know, obviously the Christians, there's a game plan, right? We were put on this earth, we flop through it for a few thousand years, and then Jesus, and then God, and then heaven, and deliverance and salvation. And there's this progress we're making. And I think one of the and again, a human thing, who doesn't want progress, is now we're going to take that, and science and society is going to go ahead and step in and replace the church and move us in a progressive nature towards, we don't know what, but I mean, at least the Christians had a place. They had a goal that they were heading towards. We're just heading towards, kind of this undetermined better place than we are. Sort of like, well, I don't know where the end is, but if we're at X right now, X plus 1 is better than X. X plus 2 is better than X plus 1. Who knows how far up we'll get, but if you get enough X pluses up the ladder there, we're soon to be in a better place. And some of these philosophers like Santayana were like, maybe progress isn't anything more than refining how you live, but there's no like you can get better. And he certainly, like he mentioned, like, like technology and mechanical things, the world of mechanics or something. He used a phrase like that, where that can improve in progress. But does that, did the Industrial Revolution, was that a great thing for workers? I mean, did they, so instead of dying in a mine, they died in machinery. It's, we refine how we live, but has things really progressed? And in some places, yes, but overall, I think it's probably time that people start looking at that, like, progress is not a guaranteed outcome from religion or humanism, science, or whatever.
I think progress is very standpoint dependent. So when it comes to humanity as a whole, progress just is a constant. I suppose what you could say is you could consider progress to be a constant kind of tug of war between all those people who can actually hold onto the rope and tug and pull it.
Yeah, it is, and that's the reality. Because, well, look at here in America, when people say "Make America Great Again," they're saying we want it more. We want to backtrack civil rights and women rights and gay rights. They want to move that all back. That's what they want. So progress to them is a definite regression for others. And the reality is progress for minorities and women. It comes at the expense of those who benefited from a regressive, overall regressive society. So yeah, you're right. There's no, it's like there's a finite amount of progress or a finite progressive energy, and the best you can hope for is an even distribution of it. But if this guy gets too much and the other guy pulls back, then there's a back and forth. So the tug of war is a really great way to look at it. And then Santayana even said, he said, everything in this world, the only progress you have is towards death.
Yeah. And he's not wrong.
No. And that's kind of a bleak thought, but but I think that's the proper perspective to have. And again, people promising progress, either from a religious standpoint or from a standpoint of, we will give you the progress that religion isn't. All of it should be something everybody's skeptical about.
Yeah.
And that's their
Yeah.
views, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I think these are the things that Gray is trying to get us to think about when he's looking at atheism without progress. Like, he doesn't really discuss that kind of thing. He's just showing us this picture. And I think he's just basically showing us the idea of not a Nietzschean Ubermensch, but somebody who has cast off the religious values, realized that their values belong to them. They live their life how they want to be lived. They're not inclined towards keeping religion as anything that's part of their life at all. Understanding the need for it, understanding why it's not a bad thing. And I think one of the things he says that when it comes to religion, when they're doing good, you go along with it. When they're doing bad, you basically stand and fight against it.
Right.
And I think that's what Gray is trying to highlight, because a lot of this book has been about how anti-religion is bad. So I think he's trying to shine a spotlight there too.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And you see it in a, especially on the YouTube and the Twitter, where it's so very toxic, and people are spreading misinformation, and that's something the skeptical community should be better at, is stopping blatant misinformation. Kind of a side note, I watched that show, The Truth in Alex Jones. It was on HBO, and it was about the subsequent trials of the Sandy Hook shooting, where Alex Jones had said, um, that it was all staged, and it was actors, and the whole point of it was to get your guns, to take your guns away, and they needed a tragic event. And a couple things you watch of that, and it was unreal to me how many people actually believe that the Sandy Hooks was fabricated. A lot of it was his, close knit, conspiracy focused folks that believe any conspiracy, or are so you know dead set against the things that they're afraid of, that they fell in. But it was amazing to me how many people just heard the noise, and then heard Sandy Hook, and then they heard crisis actors or Sandy Hook, and fabricated and believed it, or it registered in their head that that was true. And you see that a lot, that the spreading of misinformation over and over and over and over again it has a very negative effect. If it can be controlled, it should.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose you could probably argue that it has the same sort of effect as when Christians talk about how if you're a Christian, you're a really good person. And yet we constantly see, or you need Christianity to be a good person, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. Atheists are the ones that are doing all this wrong. And then atheists look in from the outside and see Christians getting arrested for all kinds of stuff like sexual slavery, battery. They see the affairs, they see them getting caught in like motels with rent boys. So when atheists talk about, or skeptics talk about, how they only accept things based on evidence, they make sure that they vet everything. You should come to skepticism because that's where the rationality lies. And they look out, they look in from the outside and they see everybody just taking all this bad information. They don't really see any difference. Like the way they see it isn't really much different from the way that the skeptic and atheist might see
Yeah.
Christians, you know.
Yeah, for sure. And certainly there's a lot of misinformation getting loudly blasted by uh, the religious, and especially in the United States, the politically motivated ones. And um, that doesn't give another person's license to do that. And
Yeah.
there should be a pushback on bad information, and there should be a pushback on a toxic approach to, and it's, you want to push back on the worst element, but you're going to hurt a lot of people that aren't that worst element.
Yeah.
And that's, I think the danger of being super zealous or super inspired. You basically get your scripts, you memorize your memes, and off you go. And that's just not a good measure to hold. It's not solving anything.
Yeah. So we can say with Santayana that, Gray wants us to see all these different kind of characteristics and how he was living his life. He also mentions Conrad,
Joseph Conrad.
Joseph Conrad. But wasn't there a Polish writer?
Yeah, he was.
Oh, he is the. Sorry.
Conrad was his English name. Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. He's Polish, and his name was some god awful Polish name with like 42 letters in it. And in his English, because English was
third
his
language.
That's right, his third language. And he and somewhere in there he ended up in France as well too. But he ended up being a sailor at a young age, and he wrote all his novels in English for a third language. And I think a lot of the people that were critics of his work, and I don't mean it in a bad way, but just really studied his work, said the fact that it was his third language probably meant he treated it very precisely and very purposely, rather than just in like a conversational style.
Yeah, because you would have to think about the word choice for almost everything, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and really make a more select. It's sort of like that scene in Dead Poets Society at the beginning where Robin Williams is telling the class never use the word very. It's lazy. We can say, instead of saying very happy, you're elated. And I think a person that learns the language at a high level, grabs more of those words and distinguishes between them, rather than just kind of the sloppy conversation style.
Yeah, I can't say much. My grasp of language is so limited, I barely have enough good words to fill any sentences I'm making.
Yeah, well, and there's certainly a and perhaps too, a person with a third language appreciates being able to communicate well, in clarity. They probably have a better appreciation for clarity. But he was a sailor and ended up going and kind of a sickly guy, and it seemed like his whole life was kind of just hanging on, but still managed to end up in like the Congo, where he wrote Heart of Darkness, which again was about the and some of the atrocities of where the Belgians would exploit the natives in the worst way. I mean, take all their resources, and then when they were done, just basically line them up and leave them for dead.
Torture them cut their leg off because they didn't keep in step with somebody else.
That's right. Yeah, lots of amputations, and just letting no respect or concern for the bodies, and obviously that would have an effect on him and on Conrad and the things that he saw. So probably not a guy that had the best outlook on humanity.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of his books dealt with progress again, in the sense of kind of like the Victorian era colonialism, and the idea where, hey, we're civilizing these people, and we're bringing them all these things, and also too not really doing a good job of taking care of the sailors and the people that got sent to these countries either.
Yeah. And in the book, doesn't it say something like, he said after he saw what happened in the Congo, he had no faith that civilizing people was actually doing good, or something along those lines.
Yeah. In fact, he had a character in one of his books, Victory. There's this character named Singleton, and that's kind of like I guess one of the main characters of the book. And someone asked him, like, and this Singleton was a sort of a street smart sailor, if you will, a guy who's been on, seen a lot of stuff, been on a lot of things. And someone asked him, why didn't you give this guy an education? And he replied, you say Singleton with an education, but first of all, what education? If it is the knowledge of how to live, my man essentially possessed it. He was in perfect accord of his life. And then he goes on to say, are we supposed to treat him trigonometry or the philosophy of Emerson? What do we do? And how do you tell a guy, the famous know thyself? That guy knows himself. And this idea of education and, educating society and all people isn't necessarily the progress that people want to make it out to be.
Yeah, I suppose there was more, or at least from Gray, there was more talk about how Conrad felt about progress than it did Santayana. Santayana, there was like a throwaway quip. But in the Conrad, he actually picks out several kind of ideas from the different characters that he has, where he says this kind of betrays Conrad's thoughts about progress, isn't there?
Yeah, and he talks about like China and a lot of the unrest that was going on there, but and his view on Christian religion was, he called it an absurd Oriental fable, but at the same time understanding that it might be something necessary to get people through what they're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's it. That's a theme, I guess you could say, you could pick out from both Conrad and Santayana. Gray highlighting the idea that, Christianity is more than just mythology. It's this living, breathing, pragmatic thing that helps people get through their day.
Yeah.
It's more than just a belief and more than just a set of rituals. It's something that they hold on to help them carry on.
Yeah, and he actually sort of felt like that thinking is what gets in our way of perfection. Is once we start to think, then that opens the door for imperfect thoughts or imperfect ideas, and the less we think, the more able we're trying, the way, and it's not to say that thinking is bad, but it works against us a lot.
Yeah, he says it's kind of a curse at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And and he felt like religion was one of the ways we deal with our relation between the dead and the living.
Yeah.
So it has its place, and he was, like I said, I read a Wikipedia article about him, and it didn't seem like he was a terribly all his novels are pretty pointedly, anti-colonialism and painted a pretty dark picture of it. Essentially, Heart of Darkness became the I think the inspiration for Apocalypse Now. So that's that's about as dark as it gets, I suppose.
Yeah.
And so again, it's you start looking at all these dark things, and you can kind of see the place that religion has, and who are we to say, oh, you need to be educated, you need to be, taught trigonometry, is like what he was saying. And it's funny too, because that always reminds me of I don't know if you've ever read the book Conspiracy of Dunces, and it's by it's about this guy in New Orleans, and John Kennedy O'Toole. It's one of my favorite books, but the main character always goes around saying that people today need to be taught more trigonometry and theology, and as if that was that would solve everything. And he was like one of the most unaware and incompetent people, but that was always one of my favorite things. So when he was like, what are we supposed to do? Start teaching these people trigonometry. I was thinking of
reminded the book.
Yeah.
Nice one. And you do kind of see that attitude in the online atheist skeptic community too.
Yeah.
Everybody should be taught critical thinking. Everybody should be taught logic. Have you ever tried science? Have you ever considered trying science rather than mythology? Have you educated yourself on the X, Y, and Z? And they are always on about this whole, once we get people educated, the world will be better. People will be better critical thinkers. But you can sort of see, we were speaking about it last week or the week before, even amongst the critical thinkers, there's still some very bad beliefs, like the whole James Lindsay idea.
Yeah.
Even among like atheists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Education doesn't necessarily mean people will be better people or become the people you think that they will become when educated. And some people get educated and just still aren't very good. Like, I'm terrible at science. So even if I was to educate myself in something like advanced biology, I wouldn't be able to take any of it in.
Yeah. And do you need to? That's
no. It doesn't affect my life. So
yeah, and you have to think like these folks in the Congo were probably like, hey, thanks for the books. I would have rather have kept my elbow, but thumbs up for all the education you gave us.
Or not thumbs up, because they took the thumbs.
You got it cut off. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and they're like, well, we learned what an asshole is.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. And so you have people living simple lives and simple ways of doing things. Is that, does that need progress? Does that need, and I don't know, as I get older, I certainly get more pressure, internal pressure to simplify, to make things easier.
Yeah.
And I like I say, I think the movement for progress, for knowledge, and it seems to get ahead of just figuring out how to get along, and how to, and if you ain't fixing that part of what's broke on you, the knowledge you accumulate is just going to go in a bad direction. And you see that where someone is toxic about something, they get a little knowledge and now they're weaponized.
Yeah.
And knowledge shouldn't be that, and learning shouldn't be that. And you see the real hardcore, science guys, saying, I don't need philosophy. It doesn't do anything. It's such a religious thing, right? It's just like the same thing with the religions. Like, if I've got Jesus, why do I need science?
Yeah.
Right? Fair enough. If I've got science, why do I need philosophy? How is that any different?
Yeah.
And I'm no great shakes at philosophy. I wish I would have read it more, and I wish I would have studied it more in my life, for sure. But just self-reflection and creating, your own philosophy, and being self-skeptical and turning those fallacies on yourself rather than other people, things like that should take a precedence over knowledge and, all those other things.
Yeah.
They're probably really not necessary. So, and for some people they are. Some people are driven by that, and that's what they're here to do. And it was even kind of like Conrad was making a lot of metaphors about the ocean.
Yeah.
And that was their god, but it was godless, right? But that was the power for these people, was the ocean. Totally godless, but still the thing that controlled them. And it was everything that they needed and everything that they wanted. So I think that's kind of the whole point of this chapter, is to be able to, abandon the idea of progress being necessary or changing people. Again, religious folks are that way for a reason. Probably best to just leave them be.
Unless they're getting in your way, or
And
I don't mean as a collective. I mean as a more focused kind of group, rather than theists want to take away the right to abortion and you're fighting all theists. Well, they're not the ones you need to be fighting. You need to be fighting the ones that are actually trying to do it. And maybe you'll get help from the ones that you manage to not harass along the way.
That's right. And then you'll be also surprised to learn that there's a bunch of secular people in that group too.
Yeah.
And that's always been the alarming thing to me. And you see it like with the issues that the trans community is dealing with. Way too many secular people on that side that you would hope that there never would be, but there are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of philosophers on the wrong side of that one too.
Yeah, and we talked last week a lot about the racism in science, and I kind of feel like we're living through that sort of thing right now, where we're going to get better information in 20 years or 10 years or 15 or 50 years, whatever it is, and they're going to look back at this time and say, well, these folks were kind of pretty shitty.
Yeah. And I think they're probably going to do the same to a lot of skeptics and atheists because of the whole religion is a mental illness thing.
Yeah.
Like we've recently just got over, homosexuality is a mental illness. People are now trying it with trans people are mentally ill. And you've got the atheists trying it with religion is a mental illness. We need to class it as a mental illness. But every time we've classified a pretty common human trait as mental illness, we've always been on the wrong side of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that one area we have made progress overall is I think people are pretty accepting of the idea that attraction is not a choice. And
it's innate. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think, perhaps religion is that way as well. It's different. I'm not saying they're the same thing, but it's probably less of a choice than people say it is. And you have environmental factors and experience factors, or, like we were talking last week, where if you have an aversion towards the science because they've been discriminatory towards you, why wouldn't the church be a good idea? So, if you just believe in God and someone tells you you're mentally ill, that's probably going to drive you closer to church, because again, we're wired to be accepted. We're wired to be, survive. And if people that are representing logic and reason are telling you have mental problems for what you believe, and you feel like, I've seen the evidence, I've considered this is where I am at this point in my life, and you're telling me I'm mentally ill, then I would hope that we're wired to avoid the toxicity of the one side and gravitate more towards the people that are accepting and, compassionate to how I feel. And I think that's how religion survives in a large part is, look at the African American churches and why they are so strong in this country. It's because of the horrific shit those people have had to deal with.
And the church, going way back to emancipation, it has been the church that has been helping them out in a lot of the cases.
Or giving them community.
The white church, giving them community. You think about the Underground Railroad, a lot of that was done through churches.
Yeah. And again, is there a choice in that? I don't really think there is. So if I'm mentally ill because I'm finding the place where it gives me the most sense of security and community and have a place, all these things are things we're striving for in our life.
Yeah.
And we go where we can find that.
Yeah. And I think you can kind of take this from Gray's discussion on Conrad, using the ocean metaphor, where people are just kind of being blown around, taken around by the sea. It's the sea that's guiding them. It's the sea that's making them happy, drawing them not to where they want to be, but just to where they are. You can kind of see that in a sort of deterministic sense too. So you could take out of it, he's saying something like, the religious people, they're that way because that's the way the wind has blown them.
Yeah.
They don't have any choice. And most skeptics and atheists online would agree that they have never made a choice in being a Christian, not only through the sense of indoctrination, but most believe in a hard determinism. So they should be a bit more gracious and understanding that these Christians have no choice.
Yep.
This is where life has brought them. If you want to do something, if you want to change them, you're going to have to do more than just yell at them, because they have there's no free will involved in them going, oh shit, you know what? Actually, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm an atheist now. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe don't change them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And maybe the idea of, like Santayana said, the cure, the cure can't kill the patient, right?
Yeah.
And I've mentioned this before, but that's exactly what happened with the indigenous people in North America, where it was like, well, we need to remove their religion, and it just destroyed the people. It was broke my heart to see that, how bad that, you take away their identity and you take away, beliefs are one thing. A religion can mean so much more than just Sky Daddy or whatever. And to mock it whatever. But then if that is your understanding of what that religion means to those people, then you're the one being simplistic.
Yeah. And
Not
an
the
asshole.
and an asshole. And yeah, we learned too that hey, don't be an asshole.
Yeah. Don't poop your pants just
Don't
because
poop
you're
your
a
pants.
Yeah.
Yeah, science and yeah, because yeah, we should have put a disclaimer on the science one that we will be saying science and faith and a lot, and have a diaper on hand, and some white wipes.
Well, in the UK in the 80s, we only had like 4 TV channels.
It's the same here.
Um,
Yeah,
oh, okay. One of them, Channel 4, it used to have like a horror film night, or,
yeah.
these are the worst of the worst kind of films. And as something bad was coming up, they would pop up a little red triangle so you could turn away if you wanted to. I'm going to have to start using that for us every time we use the word faith and science. I'll just
That's right.
pop up a little triangle and people can plug their ears.
Yeah.
When the triangle goes, they're safe to listen again without having their bubble bursted.
Or you can use that like chocolate smoothie icon with a little smiley face on it.
Yeah.
If you see that, then that. We had different, every area might have different channels, but we had 3 networks essentially, and then a PBS, a public broadcasting. But we had ABC, NBC, CBS, and then in this back in the 80s, and then eventually we got more networks. But and then the PBS. But yeah, a lot of them would have like Saturday night monster movies, and they were always the old like Boris Karloff kind of. Yeah, there were a lot of them that were pretty good, and yeah, they because there was a time in Hollywood where there were a lot of monster movies being made.
Yeah, like especially the 30s and the 50s, sort of going into the 60s. The whole drive-in sci-fi, drive-in monster thing took off, and yeah, there was just a shit ton made.
Yeah, and yeah, we used to have those too, and in fact, and then sometimes they would do like little promotions where they would send out 3D glasses. Like you could go down to your local gas station or convenience store, and Channel 6 would have get your 3D glasses. Of course, that shit didn't work, but
it did for me.
Yeah,
or did here. Yeah,
we never had good TVs, I suppose, but again, most of our screens were either small, and I think in the 80s too, like we had a color TV, but we, like most of our so like if we had a TV in our den, it might have been an old black and white one yet.
Yeah, like a little 14-incher or like 17-incher.
Yeah. Yeah,
fact,
we had like one. Yeah, we had 12. One of those where it was like a piece of furniture.
Yeah, in the living room.
Yeah, and that son of a bitch probably weighed like 700 pounds, and that was
it was easier for the company to just send an engineer to your house and build it in there rather than in a factory and ship it out to you.
Yeah, then carry it in. But yeah, and then we would have the smaller ones. But yeah, I remember watching those, and yeah, we didn't have, and that's why we ended up watching a lot of like Three Stooges and Little Rascals and stuff like that, because that was your only options to watch back then.
Yeah, kind of the same here, except we didn't get half as much American stuff as we do today. Obviously, there was a lot of British stuff.
We used to get like weird British things. Like there was one called like Cell Block something. We used to get
Prisoner Cell Block H.
Yeah. That's exactly
Australian.
It. Oh, okay. Well,
yeah.
Yep. We got that, and then there was some sort of like Masterpiece Theater or something like that. Yeah. But we would just occasionally get. And I remember watching the Black Adder show too, which I thought was phenomenal.
It's an amazing series, yeah.
Yeah, but that was much later. That was probably I might have been actually in college at that time, but we were getting more and more of the British shows, but and they would have some of the like old like Sherlock Holmes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we kind of grew up on that same era.
Nice. Okay, we kind of segued away a little here. We should probably, although saying that, we should probably wrap it up as well. I'm sorry,
Right.
we've been recording quite a while, and I've just realised it's just a little bit past 11. So
Yeah,
I'm going to have a cup of tea and go crash out. But this was an amazing discussion, and it was, like I say, probably my favourite chapter so far.
yeah, and I think the big takeaway, um, you know, um, these books by Conrad are definitely worth reading. I think Victory and Heart of Darkness are like considered in the top 50 or English novels of all time.
Yeah.
And Santiana, again, a very digestible philosophy with, I think, a more kind of puts religion in a box, but not a bad box, and
Not a
and I think,
Pandora's box.
yeah, and something that maybe people should reflect a little bit on and try to understand. And that was one of the things that both, and I'll say this and I'll be done, that Conrad and Santana both had in their writings was we lose sight of the fact that everybody has their unique experiences and that religion means different things to every single person,
Yeah.
and everything else. So we have this, like, we want to give a uniform religion or a uniform lack of religion without any regard to what people actually need. And that
Yeah.
was, kind of one of the big takeaways is understand that, not everybody is on, nobody is on the same page exactly as anybody else,
Yeah.
and everybody needs a little bit of different this, that, or the other thing. And there's no religion. And that's why do we have all the religions? Is it because nobody can get it straight? No, it's because that's what each individual needs.
Yeah. Because there is no one size fits all for human experience.
For anything. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Not for government, not for political views, not for anything. So we can't put it, in that thing. And that was kind of my big takeaway. But yeah, probably definitely one of the ones that made me think a little bit. And as I get through this book, definitely want to just start investigating some of these other guys, and learning, their basic philosophies. So when I come across them, I'll know what that's about.
Yeah. Next week's chapter is
Spinoza.
Yeah, and I think he talks about Schopenhauer a little.
He does talk about Schopenhauer. It's called The Atheism of Silence, the mystical atheism of Arthur Schopenhauer. So my guess is you won't have any of your YouTube atheists getting mentioned in the atheism of silence.
Yeah, no, they can't be quiet. That's why I made that meme. Like I thought, I might as well get in on the meme game. Everybody seems to love it in the atheist community. There's a meme that floats around where it's a serial killer stalking someone, and the serial killer shouts something out. And it's something that, the victim can't help themselves but to respond to, so that the serial killer finds him.
Yeah.
And I put, the serial killer shouts out, atheism is not just one thing.
Yeah.
And the victim shouts out, atheist is just a lack of belief in gods. And then,
yeah. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah. And that's kind of what that just reminded me of. they can't resist replying to anything. Somebody says "bless you" on the bus to the kid who sneezed, the guy will, someone somewhere will get up and yell at them for using religious language.
But yeah, it'll focus on Schopenhauer and Spinoza. Schopenhauer.
Yeah. Arthur
I believe,
Schopenhauer.
yeah, he's Swedish or Swiss, maybe.
I can't remember. I think it's Swiss. He's not someone I've read extensively, I have to admit. Read some of his stuff on pessimism as part of my degrees, but I'm not a pessimist philosopher, so.
He detests Hegel.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe Hegel's yeah. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading about this, and that'll be the last chapter.
And I'm thinking maybe one more recording after that where we just discuss our thoughts on the book in general and talk over some ideas and maybe go through some of the comments that have been left on the various videos.
Yeah, that would be good. There is a conclusion. It's not long, but there definitely is a conclusion, and we can definitely go through that. And yeah, we'll do a maybe if anybody has questions or comments, or things they've doesn't have to be a question, a comment, just saying, hey, this is something I thought about. Yeah, that would be interesting to see some of those as well too.
Yeah, the only comments we won't field are people coming in and going, atheist, there is no 7 types of atheism. There's only one type of atheism. I've had my fill of that for the last few days. So
yeah, we've clearly debunked it with the book called 7 Types of Atheism. So
exactly. Do you know what I mean? It's right there. There's
That's
empirical evidence right there.
There's empirical evidence. That's right. You've been debunked. Yay, science.
Be an atheist in silence.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's always good, Dave.
It's been great. Thank you so much, Rev. And I'll catch you on Twitter and here again next week.
I'll see you.
Have a great evening, mate. Good night.
You too.